HOA sent cops to my lake, counting the 5 times I'm not even a member. I took them to court and won. I bought peace and quiet. Karen bought binoculars and a police scanner. You ever work 40 years just to have some busybody with a clipboard try to micromanage your retirement? That's exactly how I met Clark Benson, the self-appointed sheriff of Silver Pines Lakeside community. I wasn't even in his HOA. After 3 decades in tech consulting, I cashed out, divorced amicably, and finally did what every sane 65-year-old man dreams of. I bought a quiet little lakeside cabin. Not just any cabin. This place was grandfathered out of the Silver Pines HOA's grasp. The previous owner, a shrewd old fisherman named Walt, had gotten the lot exempted back in '92 before the HOA even existed. County deed records confirmed it 6 ways from Sunday. No dues, no board meetings, no approved color palette for my siding. Freedom. So imagine my surprise when 2 weeks after moving in, a polite but visibly uncomfortable sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "Sir, we got a report that you're illegally occupying HOA property." I laughed, thought it was a joke, until I saw Clark Benson standing behind him, arms crossed, wearing a fluorescent vest, like he was directing traffic at a high school football game. "I don't think so," I said. "I've got the deed hanging right there on the wall." That was visit number 1. By the time visit 5 rolled around, it wasn't funny anymore. Clark had reported me for unauthorized dock construction. I used the same dock Walt used for 30 years. Excessive noise. I don't even own a stereo. I do own a Labrador that occasionally barks at ducks. Unauthorized landscaping modifications. Translation: I planted tomatoes. Each time the sheriff's department sent different deputies. Each time I showed my paperwork. Each time they left, apologizing for the misunderstanding. But here's what really ground my gears. Clark wasn't misunderstanding anything. This was targeted harassment with a thin layer of HOA bylaws as an excuse. And while most folks would have gotten worn down, sold the property, and moved along, well, I'm not most folks. See, Clark made one fatal mistake. He assumed I was just another retiree with too much time and too little fight. What he didn't know: I spent 15 years as a compliance auditor for commercial real estate firms. I've seen every zoning scam, title scam, and HOA overreach a stunt in the book. And buddy, I've beaten them. By the time Clark sent that 5th deputy, I had already started gathering evidence, trail cam footage, copies of every police dispatch record, and my personal favorite, a voice recording of Clark threatening my neighbor's 16-year-old grandson for parking a non-compliant pickup truck in my driveway. That was going to come in very handy, but I didn't just want to defend myself. Oh no, I wanted to set an example that would make every clipboard-wielding HOA tyrant think twice. And if Clark thought sending the cops 5 times was intimidating, he was about to find out what it felt like to be the one answering questions in court. To be continued. By the 3rd police visit, I stopped getting annoyed. I started getting curious. Now, folks who haven't dealt with an HOA might think Clark was just overzealous. Misguided, maybe? Thought he was keeping the neighborhood orderly. That's what most people assumed about these little power-hungry paper pushers. But I'd seen this pattern before. This wasn't about grass, length, or dock permits. It was about control and Clark. Clark was used to winning. "I own that dock, sir." The 3rd time deputies came, it was over my dock. 2 uniformed officers stood awkwardly at the end of my gravel path, while Clark Benson, fluorescent vest, clipboard, mirrored sunglasses pointed across my yard like General Patton spotting enemy tanks. "That dock violates community shoreline guidelines," he declared, like he had jurisdiction over Lake Superior. Itself, Deputy Martinez looked exhausted. "Sir, can we see your property documents again?" Of course, I smiled, producing my now well-thumbed manila folder. Deed parcel map, zoning confirmation, and a lovely letter from county planning stating yet again that my property is not subject to Silver Pines HOA oversight. Clark leaned in, squinting at the papers like a student hoping the test answers would change if he stared hard enough. "But the dock," he insisted, "it's an eyesore, not in line with the neighborhood's aesthetic." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, Clark. You've lived across the bay for 10 years and never once found it unsightly while Walt owned it." The deputy coughed, trying not to smirk. Clark's sunglasses slipped a little on his sweaty nose. "I'm filing a formal citation." "You can't file a citation, Clark," I reminded him, calm as a preacher at Sunday service. "You don't have enforcement power here. You're not law enforcement. You're not code compliance. You're a guy with a clipboard and a hobby that's gotten wildly out of hand." That's when I noticed the Subaru. Same one that had been lurking near my driveway. HOA logo slapped on the side like a dollar store magnet. And it wasn't just Clark anymore. Two other HOA board members were sitting inside peeking over clipboards like the neighborhood's version of the Supreme Court. This was coordinated by week 6. The phone call started. Not from Clark, from neighbors. Some sympathetic, some nervous. I don't want to get involved, one told me quietly. But Clark's telling folks you're building a boat rental business. Says you're violating commercial use codes. That was new. Another neighbor emailed me a blurry photo Clark had distributed at an HOA meeting. It showed my granddaughter's kayak tied up at the dock. Caption, illegal commercial operation in progress. I should have been furious. Instead, I chuckled. Poor Clark, he was running out of violations to invent. But then came the real kicker. A letter arrived certified mail from the HOA's legal representative. It politely informed me that due to a recent review of property boundaries, Silver Pines HOA believed a portion of my lakeside frontage encroached on common use land. They offered me two choices: remove my dock and vacate the disputed area, sell the disputed strip, half my backyard, mind you, to the HOA for a generous sum of $3,000. That patch of lakeshore alone was worth at least $75,000. They might as well have offered me a Walmart gift card and a handshake. It was extortion wrapped in polite legalese. I made 3 copies of the letter and added them to my ever-growing evidence fold. Now I've always said never interrupt a man while he's digging his own grave. Clark was about elbow deep when he made his next move. I caught him trespassing. Not once, not twice, 4 times. First, he claimed he was surveying for the HOA. Then he said he was monitoring shoreline erosion. The final time, he didn't bother with excuses. He was photographing my granddaughter's treehouse. That's when the trail cams I'd installed. God bless Amazon Prime caught something truly beautiful. Clark standing on my property, clipboard in one hand, radio in the other, telling someone, if he won't move, we'll get the county to force an easement. Trust me, he'll cave. He didn't know the camera was rolling. He also didn't know my son-in-law was the assistant DA for the county. Oops. By now, the community was starting to wake up. Turns out I wasn't Clark's first target. An elderly widow had been pressured into selling her lakefront garden because her roses violated uniform landscaping policy. A veteran couple had been fined thousands over an RV parked slightly over the property line for 3 days. Clark's favorite game was paper cuts, small relentless attacks until people bled out money and patience. But he'd never gone after someone who could hit back, and certainly not someone who knew how to audit financial records and legal filings like a bloodhound. I held a barbecue. Open invite. Let's talk about community, I said in my email blast. 35 neighbors showed up, including 2 former HOA board members who'd resigned after clashing with Clark. By sunset, I had 5 written statements from neighbors detailing harassment, copies of dubious citations Clark had issued over the years, proof he'd authorized spending HOA funds on compliance patrols without full board approval, and then came the cherry on top. A retired surveyor named Hank shuffled up to me after the burgers were gone. Got something you'll want, he said, passing me a rolled-up blueprint. It was the original 1992 survey map, the one that proved my property line extended exactly where I'd always said it did. Clark tried to pay me to draw a new version, Hank whispered. Thought you should know, by the end of that week, my evidence folder was thicker than a Thanksgiving turkey. I consulted with a property attorney, paid a retainer, happily, filed a formal harassment complaint with the county, and sent Clark Benson and the entire Silver Pines HOA a cease and desist letter so airtight it could have doubled as a submarine hatch. Clark responded by calling the sheriff. Again, visit number 5. This time, the deputy didn't ask for my documents. He asked Clark to leave my property, and he mentioned off the record that I wasn't the only one filing complaints anymore. By the time Clark drove off in his beat-up Subaru that evening, the wheels of justice were already in motion. My lawyer had drafted a lawsuit, multiple counts, harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, attempted property fraud, and the county had quietly opened an investigation into Silver Pines HOA financial practices. Clark thought this was a game of who could outstubborn the other. He was about to learn it was really a game of who had the better lawyer. If you think this was wild, wait till you hear what Clark did next. It makes trespassing look like a polite handshake. Not because Clark gave up, but because he went from calling the cops to calling code enforcement. See, after the sheriff's department made it crystal clear they were done playing his HOA version of Groundhog Day, Clark decided to get creative. That's when a man in a beige county vehicle pulled into my driveway. The shed in question, my granddaughter's treehouse. According to Clark's latest complaint, the treehouse exceeded the 120 square feet limit for auxiliary structures and was too close to the property line. And of course, he left out a few tiny details. The treehouse had been built 15 years ago. It was legally grandfathered in, and it wasn't even a shed. It had no foundation, no utilities, just a wooden platform with a rope ladder and a pirate flag my granddaughter had proudly hoisted herself. The code inspector, a kind man named Bill, looked more embarrassed than annoyed. Sir, between you and me, this is a waste of my time. I've seen more dangerous structures at church carnivals. I'll mark it as compliant. Clark sitting in his Subaru across the street with binoculars. Yes, binoculars. Furiously scribbled notes on his clipboard. Strike one. When citations failed, Clark turned to the most dangerous tool of any HOA tyrant. The rumor mill. Suddenly I was hearing things about myself that would have made a daytime soap opera blush. According to Clark's version of events, I was running an illegal Airbnb out of my cabin. I had suspicious visitors translation, my fishing buddies. I had financial troubles translation. I paid cash for my truck instead of financing. Oh, and apparently I was arming my property with unauthorized surveillance devices. You mean the trail cams that caught Clark trespassing? Yeah, those. Neighbors started getting anonymous letters warning them to distance themselves from disruptive elements. Some got fines for parking violations they'd never received before. Others suddenly failed landscaping inspections for things like non-native species, which turned out to be American maples. Clark wasn't just after me anymore. He was punishing anyone who dared associate with me. I decided it was time to confront the beast in its natural habitat. Silver Pines HOA's next monthly meeting, I brought my property lawyer, my folder of evidence, and most importantly, 3 neighbors who'd volunteered to testify. When we walked into the community center, you could hear the oxygen leave the room. Clark sat at the head table like a king guarding his plastic throne, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I calmly requested to address the floor. Clark denied me. Then my lawyer politely cited the HOA's bylaws, which allowed any property owner or impacted community member to speak at meetings. Clark tried again. My lawyer interrupted, handing him a letter from the county prosecutor's office, reminding him that retaliation against whistleblowers was a criminal offense. Clark's hands visibly shook, his sunglasses. Nowhere in sight. We were indoors after all. I laid out Hank's original 1992 property survey, the one proving my property line was untouched and undisputed. Clark interrupted. That survey's outdated. We had a new assessment done. Funny you mentioned that? I smiled, holding up Exhibit B, a signed affidavit from the very surveyor Clark had tried to bribe, and a recording of Clark offering him incentives to adjust the property line. You could hear the audience murmur, like a brewing storm. Next came the trail cam footage. Clark on my property. Clark discussing the plan to force an easement. Clark photographing children's play equipment. I paused the video. Does this look like community maintenance patrol? To you, dead silence. Even the board members looked like they'd swallowed lemons. At this point, the treasurer, a woman named Doris, who'd kept suspiciously quiet all year, stood up. I'd like to remind the board, she said, voice trembling but firm, that Mr. Benson has been making unilateral decisions without board approval, including spending HOA funds on legal threats and private investigators. She held up her own folder. Bank records. Check copies. Turns out Clark had been funding his little personal vendetta using HOA dues, thousands of dollars worth. The room split. Some stood up shaking their heads, demanding Clark's removal. Others, mostly the busybodies who'd enjoyed his reign of petty terror, mumbled about order and rules. But the swing vote came from a surprising source, Bob Miller, Vietnam vet, HOA member for 20 years. Barely spoke at meetings I served overseas, he said gruffly. Came home thinking I'd live free. Bought my house fair and square. I've watched this man, he pointed at Clark, bully, good people out of their homes. No more, he turned to the board. I motioned to suspend Mr. Benson pending investigation. Clark, sweating, now tried to rally his allies. This is a witch hunt. You'll all regret this. I've protected this community from lawlessness. My lawyer stood, Mr. Benson. Your statements are now being recorded as part of an ongoing investigation into fraud, harassment, and potential criminal trespass. Clark bolted for the door. But not before hurling one last threat. You think you've won? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, but I did. A desperate man who'd finally been outplayed. By week's end, the HOA board voted to remove Clark from his position. The county prosecutor confirmed a fraud investigation, and several neighbors filed civil suits for harassment. Clark tried to countersue. It went about as well as you'd expect. His own attorney withdrew once presented with the pile of evidence my lawyer and I had compiled. Remember that certified letter offering me $3,000 for my lakeshore? We added it as Exhibit D in my civil suit for attempted property fraud. By the time the dust settled, Clark wasn't just out of a job. He was looking at criminal charges, personal liability for damages, and a foreclosure on his house to cover the settlements. Oh, and that new property assessment he'd commissioned. The county invalidated it and slapped him with fines for falsifying public records. If you thought Clark's downfall was satisfying, just wait till you hear what happened when the court finally handed down their verdict. Spoiler, it wasn't just money that changed hands. Gone was the clipboard. Gone was the fluorescent vest. Gone was the smug, tight-lipped smile that had haunted my weekends for months. He looked like what he was now. A desperate man in a cheap suit with a public defender and a pile of very bad choices stacked up behind him. The case wasn't just David Johnson versus Clark Benson. It was David Johnson versus Silver Pines HOA too. Why? Because Clark hadn't acted alone. Even if the other board members claimed ignorance legally, they were responsible for what their compliance officer had done. We had filed a civil suit alleging harassment, defamation, trespassing, attempted property fraud, emotional distress, and misuse of HOA funds, and the county had filed criminal charges separately for fraud, filing false reports, trespassing, and tampering with property records. Clark was fighting on two fronts and losing on both. Judge Martha Langley was the type of woman who could silence a room just by entering. Late 60s, sharp as a tack and allergic to nonsense. When Clark's attorney tried to argue that my lawsuit was vindictive, she raised one eyebrow and said Mr. Benson's behavior was either malicious or the result of breathtaking incompetence. I'm eager to find out which. I liked her immediately. My lawyer, Jennifer, was relentless. First, she played the trail cam footage. Clark trespassing, photographing the treehouse, and admitting on tape he planned to force an easement. Then the affidavit from Hank the surveyor Clark tried to bribe. Then the certified letter offering me $3,000 for land worth $75,000. Then testimony from 5 neighbors who described how Clark had harassed, fined, or coerced them over the years. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow. Clark's attorney kept objecting. Judge Langley kept overruling him. Clark's only defense: he claimed he was upholding community standards. When asked why he falsified a property survey, he stammered something about correcting old errors. When asked why he used HOA funds without board approval, he blamed the treasurer who had already testified against him. When asked why he trespassed, he said he was conducting maintenance inspections. Judge Langley leaned forward. Mr. Benson, you're neither a licensed inspector nor a sworn officer. You're a volunteer HOA representative. You don't have the authority to conduct inspections on private property, especially property not governed by the HOA. Clark's face turned the color of an overripe tomato. Just when it seemed like we'd won, Jennifer pulled out one last trump card. Your Honor, she said, we have obtained new bank records from the HOA's accounts, which show that Mr. Benson authorized payments not only for so-called compliance patrols, but also for private surveillance contractors. The courtroom murmured. Jennifer continued. One of these contractors submitted an invoice for monitoring David Johnson's property and compiling a resident behavior report. Clark's head snapped up. That wasn't just harassment, that was illegal surveillance. Even the HOA board's attorney looked horrified. Judge Langley ordered the new evidence admitted immediately. When Jennifer rested our case, Clark didn't even try to present witnesses. His attorney stood up and said, Your Honor, my client would like to request a settlement discussion. Judge Langley frowned. I think we've passed that point, Counselor. She called a recess. When we returned, Clark was gone. His attorney explained he had left the premises voluntarily. Translation, he ran. The judge issued a bench warrant for his arrest. 2 hours later, the jury returned unanimous. Clark Benson guilty on all civil counts, ordered to pay $425,000 in damages. Personal liability, not just HOA insurance, subject to criminal trial. Next, Silver Pines, HOA, liable for $200,000 in damages to me. In additional plaintiffs, my supportive neighbors who had also joined the suit, court-mandated reformation of board policies, HOA placed under temporary receivership. The local news ran the story under the headline, Lake Cabin Owner Defeats Rogue HOA Enforcer in Landmark Case. Clark was arrested 3 days later. His house went into foreclosure. The HOA board president resigned in disgrace. Two other board members were barred from holding HOA positions ever again. The county prosecutor pursued criminal charges. Clark pled no contest to fraud and trespassing. He was sentenced to 1 year in county jail and 5 years probation. With the HOA board gutted, the community voted to elect an entirely new leadership team. Guess who they asked to serve as interim compliance advisor? Yep, me, I declined. Of course, I've done my time in the trenches, I said at the community meeting. But I'll gladly host the first annual Freedom from Tyranny BBQ at my place. We had over 60 attendees. Former Clark supporters came. Too many apologized personally. The same deputy who'd once responded to Clark's phony calls showed up in plain clothes and shared a beer with me. We grilled, we laughed. The pirate flag still flew from my granddaughter's treehouse. No clipboards, no binoculars, no citations. Just neighbors, like it should have been all along. Clark thought he could bully people into submission. He thought the law was a weapon he could twist for his own gain. But the law doesn't work like that. Not in America, not in my town, and definitely not on my land. If you thought Clark's downfall was satisfying, wait till you hear what happened when he tried to make a comeback. Yes, he wasn't done yet. But like any HOA tyrant who'd tasted power, he didn't just go away. Oh no. 6 months after the court case ended, rumors started swirling. Clark was trying to form a new HOA. It was laughable at first. A flyer showed up in neighborhood mailboxes. Silver Pines Preservation Committee, protecting property values and community standards. Guess whose name was at the bottom? Clark Benson, Chairman Provisional. The man had gone from clipboard tyrant to self-declared committee leader. No legal standing, no board, no authority, just a fancy title and a mailing list. Clark's pitch: voluntary membership, reasonable dues, helpful compliance tips. Translation: give me your money and let me boss you around again. But this time the neighborhood had changed. People remembered. They remembered the false citations, the trespassing, the surveillance, the lawsuits, and they remembered standing together at that courtroom and watching justice finally catch up. Within a week, over 100 residents signed a petition formally rejecting the new committee. Local businesses refused to distribute Clark's flyers. Even Clark's former supporters politely told him to get lost. And when he tried to knock on doors to recruit members, one neighbor, or old Bob Miller, simply held up a copy of the court verdict and shut the door in his face. I stayed out of it. No lawsuits, no speeches, no warnings. I didn't need to. Clark's reputation did all the work for me. About a month after Clark's failed comeback, I got a knock on my door. It was Doris, the former HOA treasurer who had testified against Clark David. She said the new board wants to propose something. I raised an eyebrow. If this is about me joining? She laughed. No. We've learned our lesson about handing out power too easily. What they wanted was simple: to formalize a community charter, ensuring transparent finances, no compliance actions without a board vote, no one person could serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and most importantly, no enforcement authority over properties outside HOA boundaries. Ever again. They wanted me to review the draft before the community voted. 2 weeks later, we held a neighborhood barbecue bigger than the last. We weren't celebrating me. We were celebrating us, a community that had stood up, woken up, and drawn a line in the sand. The charter passed unanimously. Clark, needless to say, wasn't invited. Soon after Clark moved out of Silver Pines, rumor had it, the stress of legal fees, fines, and foreclosure had finally forced him to sell. Last I heard, he was living in a condo complex across town as a tenant. The ultimate irony: that condo complex did have an HOA. And according to a very amused mutual acquaintance, they'd already fined Clark twice for having an unauthorized political sign in his window. Poetic justice, if I've ever seen it. Life returned to normal. My granddaughter still ruled her treehouse, pirate flag flying proudly. The lake stayed quiet. The neighbors, once strangers, became friends. There were still little HOA annoyances here and there. Of course, no community is perfect. But now when issues came up, they were handled with transparency, fairness, and a lot fewer clipboards. Clark thought power came from enforcing rules. But power, real power, comes from community, from people standing together against intimidation and abuse. We fought for peace and we earned it. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told it's easier just to move. Sometimes moving isn't the answer. Sometimes you plant your feet, you gather your neighbors, and you say, enough. So the next time someone waves a clipboard at you and says, we have rules here, just remember, rules work both ways. And justice always finds a way. Even if it takes 5 police visits, 2 lawsuits, and 1 unforgettable barbecue. If you think this story ended here, you might want to hear about the time Clark's replacement tried pulling a fast one. Spoiler, it didn't end well either. Stay tuned for more real HOA tales soon. I didn't choose this fight. No one wants to take on an HOA dictator. Most folks just want to mow their lawn, enjoy a weekend barbecue, and be left alone. But sometimes peace isn't given. It has to be defended. Here's what our community, and hopefully yours, should take away from this mess. Know your property rights. Don't assume your HOA or any neighbor with a clipboard automatically has power over your land. Understand your deed. Review your parcel maps. Know where your property lines are. If you don't, someone like Clark Benson will try to redraw them for you. Record everything: trail cams, phone calls, written notices. Trust me, memories fade, but video and paper don't. Without that footage of Clark trespassing, this story might have ended very differently. Stand together. Bullies thrive in isolation. Clark's biggest mistake wasn't picking a fight with me. It was thinking he could pick off residents one by one without anyone standing up. When we unified, he crumbled. Watch the watchers. HOA boards are supposed to serve the community, not rule it. If your board refuses transparency or lets one person act unchecked, red flag. Push for regular audits and limit term lengths. Power should never be permanent. The law works if you work it. Yes, it's slow. Yes, it's frustrating, but the legal system can protect you. You just have to be prepared to fight smart, document everything, and outlast the petty tyrants. One final thought. Clark once told me, "You think you're untouchable." Funny thing is, I never wanted to be untouchable. I just wanted to fish with my granddaughter and grill in peace. But when someone tries to take that away, well, you fight. Not just for yourself, for every neighbor who's been fined unfairly, for every veteran told to move their RV, for every widow harassed over a flower garden. Because bullies don't stop until you make them stop. Your turn. Now I want to hear your stories. Have you ever dealt with an out-of-control HOA? Has a neighbor or board member ever abused their power? How did you fight back, or did you wish you had? Drop your experiences in the comments below. Let's share, let's learn, and let's remind every HOA Karen or Clark out there. This community fights back. And hey, if you thought this story was wild, just wait until you hear what happened the year after Clark left. Spoiler, the new HOA president thought he could outsmart the community too. It didn't end well. Stay tuned.